Crazy Steve. Let's go on to the next part in it. Well, Steve went to bed that night, and so did my grandparents, My grandfather and grandmother had one bedroom, Steve had a different bedroom, and my mother and my father had another bedroom. So that took up all the bedrooms. So, I didn't mind. I slept out in the back of the truck. It was a nice summer night, and I headed out to bed. It wasn't too late. I guess it must have been about 9:30 or something, and I crawled into the back of the truck and laid down in the bed and cracked the windows open. Had screens on the windows, really nice breeze coming in, just the right temperature for sleeping. So I laid down, cuddled into my blankets, and got warmed up, and started to drift off to sleep. So I was laying there sleeping most all night, and wee early hours of the morning. I can't tell you exactly what time it was. It must have been about 5 o'clock in the morning. Some vehicle come driving in down the dead-end lane. Of course, being as it's been quiet all night, it disturbed me and it woke me up. So I heard the doors slamming on the vehicle. Didn't know who it was. Well, guess who it was? It was Steve and his buddy Ole, his drinking buddy. And Ole was letting him off. So Steve got out of the truck, or car, or whatever it was that they were driving. I didn't really see what they were driving, but I could see the lights on it and everything, and the light. Ole drove back off again, left Steve off. So Steve come ambling on over, and he was drunk. And he come up to the front of the truck, and I could see his dark shape outside the truck, but it was more light outside the truck than in. It was darker inside the truck. He couldn't see me, and he couldn't see that I was awake, and I was actually watching him through the window, peeking up through the window, watching him. He got on the front bumper, and he started to jump up and down on the front bumper, and of course the truck started to bounce up and down, and then he went around the back of the truck, and he started to lift on the rear bumper, and he started to shake it up and down, and then he started to say, wake up, and he's slurring his words, he's drunk. And then he went around to the side and grabbed a hold of the wheel well. And he started to lift and shake the truck back and forth. Amazing how much he was shaking that truck. Anyway, they were around the other side, he started to shake that side. He started to yell, get up, you dirty fat pig, and stuff like that. Get up, wake up, can't you see it's morning, and all this kind of stuff, And it was still dark out. So he continued with that for a while, and he started to actually frustrate me, I started to get quite irritated, but I didn't say nothing. I still pretended to be asleep. After a while, he got fed up, and he threw his hands down to the sides, and he started to march up toward the house. Once he got up to the house, the front of the house, he was very quiet about going inside. He crept in. He cracked the door open very slowly, and he stepped inside the house, and he shut the door very quietly behind him. So I started to calm back down, and I laid back down in bed, and I was just kind of shaking my head back and forth, thinking, I was thinking he was nutty. Tell you the truth, honest to goodness, I was thinking the guy's nutty. He's losing it, but he'd shook me up a little bit. I was a little bit upset with him, I didn't like what he'd done, waking me up that early in the morning. I wasn't happy about it, let's just put it that way. But I went back to sleep. It didn't take me long to get back to sleep. When you're a young fella that age, you can go to sleep really easy. It's you sleep really good too, not like when you get older. When you get older, you start to get insomnia and stuff like that. When you're that age, you can really sleep good. So I went back to sleep. When I woke back up, it must have been 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, And so I got out of the truck, and I went up to the house, and the door was open. They left the door open for me that night because they wanted me to get in, That's how Steve got in too, without knocking or anything. I did like Steve, opened the door real slowly and quietly and crept into the house. And it was warmer inside the house, kind of a little bit cool that morning. Not real cold or anything, but the nighttime would cool things off. And it was warm inside the house, and I went down the hallway a little bit. Now, there was a hallway, and then there was a kitchen to the right. And there was openings on either side of the hallway, like hallway openings leading into the kitchen. There's two openings leading into the kitchen, I believe, and two openings leading into the living room on the hallway. So I walked by the first opening that led into the living room. And as soon as I walked by that opening, there was Steve. He was sitting there looking right at me. And he was sitting in his Scandinavian chair. Both arms were hanged out over each side of the chair. And his feet were up on the ottoman. Now, the ottoman was like a little footstool all covered with crushed velvet. It was red colored. And it wasn't very big, but it was I think it had wheels underneath it, so you could wheel it around on the floor. He had both feet up on the ottoman, and he didn't have a shirt on, as usual. And at his side, in his hand, he had this big, long wrench. I don't know where he got it, but it looked like a wrench that you'd use on a truck. It wasn't a small wrench, and it was all chrome. And he had it in his hand. And he looked at me, and he didn't say nothing. But he had a very cross look on his face. His eyes were all down, like just right. He was right, like he was full of hate. He picks the wrench up. He sits up in the chair. He slams the wrench down on the ottoman. Now the sun was shining in the window, and there was rays of sun coming across from the big front window, right down across where he was, right across the front of the ottoman. These rays of sunshine, and when he hit the ottoman, this big cloud of dust went in the air, and you could really see it good because of the way the sun was shining across the dust. This big cloud of dust, and he left a little dent in the ottoman, but he didn't break through the fabric. He didn't quite hit hard enough to break through the fabric, but he hit it fairly hard with a thump sound with the wrench. He says, "That guy." He says, "That guy." He says, "I'm going to hit him over the head and break his skull open with this wrench." I didn't know who that guy was, but he had a cross look on his face. He picked the wrench up and he slammed it down again, but not quite as hard as the first time, and it made another little dent in the top of the crushed velvet fabric on the ottoman. And the wrench just sat there. And he says, "That guy, that dirty guy," And then he leans back in the chair and he swings his arm back around where it was when it first started, and the wrench hangs down from his hand, and he kind of lays back in the chair. So when he did that, I kind of made my escape, and I walked down the hallway a little bit further and went off into the next opening that went into the kitchen. I looked in the fridge, saw some nice bread in there and some butter and stuff, and I started to put it in the toaster, and I started to make myself some toast. So I was real quiet in the kitchen. I didn't want to disturb Steve anymore with this big wrench. So I made myself some toast and buttered it and jammed it and ate it, and everybody else was starting to get up by that time. My parents and everybody else. And they were quietly coming into the kitchen and talking and cooking a few things, and nobody was going in with Steve, where Steve was. So a little bit later, I went in where Steve was and took a peek, and seeing what he was doing. And he dropped the wrench on the floor, and it was laying next to the floor between his chair, his Scandinavian chair, and the couch. And his head was tilted back, and his mouth was open, and his eyes were shut, and both arms had slumped down to the side of the chair, and his feet were still up on the ottoman crossed. His legs were crossed, and it was obvious that he'd fell asleep, and nobody was paying any attention to him. So my mother comes along. She says to me, "Listen, come on in the bedroom here. I want to talk to you for a minute." And me and my father both want to talk to you. So I went into the bedroom with them. And they talked real quietly. They whispered. My father, he slid a knife in the door, And I said, "What's that for?" And he says, "Well, me and your mother, we don't really trust Steve." They said, he's acting a little bit erratic." And my mother said, "Yeah, I know." And my mother said, "Listen," she said, "I've arranged for you to go down and stay with your aunt, Irene and Keith, down in Richmond Hill. Well, I really liked that idea because my aunt, she was a really nice woman. She was a redhead, and she was a little bit stout, not fat though. She wasn't fat, but she was very full of energy. And her and Keith. Now Keith, he was a jovial fella. He was tall and skinny, and he was a hard worker. He worked at windows. He put windows in. They had a nice house in Richmond Hill on a lake. It must have been on about an acre on the lake, and they had 2 boys. And their boys had been my playmates sometimes when they were younger. They used to come visit us in Florida, and we used to go run around and play together when we were 7 or 8 years old. Now, one of the boys was named Wayne, and the other boy was named Gregory. And Gregory was a year older than me. Wayne was a year younger. I was 18 at the time, so Gregory must have been about 19, and Wayne must have been about 17 years old. Now, what happened was my mother was arranging for me to go down and visit with them for a few days down on the lake, and she evidently was calling Irene and asking Irene if I could stay with her, and Irene must have said yes. So I really liked this idea. And of getting away from Steve, because it's just kind of, I don't really know what it was, but maybe I could just tell by the way he felt about me and stuff, and also his attitude and everything. I didn't feel right there, staying there with him. So I really liked this idea because I was going to be able to stay with Irene and Keith and with Gregory and Wayne. And I said to myself, oh boy, this sounds like fun. I said, when can I go down? She said, well, we're going to take you down tomorrow, down to visit them. And you can stay with them for a week or 2. I said to myself, oh boy, this is going to be great, So the next day came. And nothing a whole lot happened in that next day, that next night. I think that I slept pretty silently in the truck. And anyway, I think Steve was mostly missing anyway. He wasn't around much. So my mother took me down to Irene and Keith. They drove me down. On the way, they stopped at a fruit market, and we got a few bags of fruit and some baskets of fruit and stuff. And we drove into Irene and Keith, and Irene was there. And very friendly, and Irene said, after my mother left, Irene said, come on down, I want to show you where you'll be staying. So, went on down the stairs into the basement. Now, this wasn't your regular basement. This basement had all been completely furnished, and the back side of the basement was level with the ground, and the basement didn't smell musty at all. I mean, it was finished really nice. There was a nice little living room there, and there was a nice little bedroom, and a nice bathroom, a full-size bathroom, all in this apartment in the basement. And also, to boot, in the living room they had a sofa, and Keith had bought one of these VHS machines, one of the very early ones. And back in those days, that was a real novelty. It wasn't like it is today, Those VHS machines then were just coming out on the market. They were extremely expensive. They were like about $2,000. They were called a beta machine, And the tapes for them were like $200 a tape, or $100 a tape. And he had about a dozen tapes, different movies. Some of the latest movies that just came out, One of the movies was called The Blues Brothers, I remember that one he had. And he had a number of other ones that just came out, newest movies. And so, and then going out the 2 back doors, he had 2 great big sliding glass windows leading out back onto the lake. And going out those 2 big glass doors, it went down a hill, and it led down to the lake, and it was nice grassy, and he had about 2 canoes down there, and I think he had a paddle boat, and he had a little dock where you could dock them to, and the lake was absolutely gorgeous. It was fresh, clean water, and they used to pump it up to the houses that lived all the way around the lake. Now, there's a number of homes going all the way around the lake, and they used it for fresh water source. I guess it was a spring-fed lake, and you could see down into the water like 10, 15 feet deep. Nice crystal clear water. And that time of the summer when I landed in there to stay with Irene and Keith, honest to goodness, the temperature was just right, and the days were nice and sunny, and the lake was warmed up enough where you could swim in it without getting too cold, Really, really nice. Nice accommodations. So I went to bed that night, the first night, and I slept really good, Woke up the next day, went upstairs, and Irene had already cooked a bunch of pancakes and stuff, and they were waiting for me, her and Keith. So I went in and sat down at the table, and Irene, she scooped me out a couple nice big pancakes, and blueberry pancakes, and laid them on my plate, and Keith was sitting across the table for me. And, Keith liked to joke in a little bit of a jovial way, It wasn't anything harmful or anything, but he liked to kid around a little bit, And one of the ways he liked to kid around was, well, Irene, she was working, just like she normally does. She's always working. So she was working over there in the kitchen, on the other side of the kitchen, cleaning dishes or whatever, and wiping dishes off, and wiping counters off, and scrubbing forks and stuff like that, So Keith looks over at Irene, and he says, Irene, he says, this boy needs more pancake syrup. And of course, Irene totally ignored Keith because she knew he was kidding around, right? He says, come on, Irene, get him some pancake syrup. Well, I already had pancake syrup there. Irene, she was on top of everything, but Keith was kidding. This is his way of joking. A big smile on Keith's face. He's kind of laughing. Come on, Irene, he says, bring him some more pancake syrup. And Irene still ignored him. And then he says, after about a minute goes by, he says, how do you like the pancakes, Ford? Big smile on his face, And I says, oh, they're good. He says, Irene, he says, bring this boy some honey for his pancakes. He hasn't got enough honey. And Irene still ignored him over there. She was still putting kitchen dishes away in the cupboard. She knew he was just joking, She knew how his humor was. And then a little bit later goes by, and then he says, Irene, bring this boy some butter for his pancakes. Bring him another pancake, Irene. Come on, Irene, hurry up, he says. And a big smile on his face, He's joking around. Anyway, that was how Keith used to like to joke, and stuff like that. So things went along pretty good there, and I had an enjoyable breakfast eating the pancakes, and the next thing you know, I wanted to go out and try that canoe, so I kind of excused myself from the table, and I trotted on downstairs, and I couldn't wait to get out and get into that canoe, and I started canoeing around the lake. Well, I canoed around that lake all day, and I'm going to tell you, it's one of the most enjoyable days that was. I'll remember it for a long time. That was really fun, canoeing around that lake and exploring that lake and fishing and stuff on that lake with that canoe. It was a little green canoe. It was a one-seater, and I think he had two canoes there. He had one that was really big and long. It was made for about 4 people. And then he had this little green two-seater canoe, and that's the one I took. And it leaked a little bit, but it didn't leak much, just a little bit. And I was sitting in one end of it, and the bow was kind of up on the other end, because I was a fairly heavy boy, I think I weighed about 180 pounds. And it was only a small canoe, but it was just perfect for me, one oar, one paddle, and I paddled around that lake, and I explored that lake all day long, looked down into the water, found little nuances, little places I could go, like little. There was a few little coves and stuff down around the other end of the lake, and I'll tell you, by nighttime I was getting pretty darn hungry. Okay, I'll tell you what, guys. I'm going to get on to part 4, and this is the end of part 3. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll catch you later. Bye bye.